Ladies and gentlemen, my fellow Kenyans, I want to wish you a good day. You probably have never heard of me. My name is Stephen Magu. I'm a Kenyan national, a citizen, a patriot in my heart. And this is probably one of the last things I thought I might ever do in my life. Because like most Kenyans, I grew up thinking that politics is a dirty game, that I did not want to be involved in politics. But politics is very personal, and I'm here to briefly talk to you about how to make Kenyan politics personal, especially with the upcoming general election of August 9th, 2022, a little over 7 months. Now, first and foremost, I want to say that I am most humbled to offer my independent candidacy for the position of President of the Republic of Kenya during this year's general election. But this is not just a campaign, and I'm certain you know there's enough candidates out there who are trying to get elected. And so the question would be, why would anyone considering politics in Kenya even want to run? This is not just a campaign, this is actually a movement to make a better Kenya, a better republic, to move us towards better conversations and better public policy. Part of our obligation as Kenyans is to hold our government accountable, to elect it, but also hold it accountable, but also to contribute ideas to those who make laws under which we must live. And so it's our obligation as citizens to help synthesize government so that it works for all Kenyans, not just those Kenyans who happen to be in power. And so it is time for us to have different conversations, I think, about the direction and the future of our republic. Every 5 years, we have an opportunity to change the direction or to at least affect it significantly, and this year we have such an opportunity. So over the past many years during campaign seasons, including right now, you have been hearing statements and promises and rallies that are not rallies, about who is running for president, about promises, about different things people are going to do, this economic plan and that economic plan. But more importantly, we've been hearing about coalitions, who is in coalition with who and who is not. Come August 9th, you, my fellow Kenyans, we will have the solemn responsibility to choose a leader for the next 5 years. This is it's a weighty obligation. Now, we have to remember that the day after elections, we regular Kenyans will still have bills. We'll have tuition to pay. We have to pay the other things we have to pay, electric bills, tokens, those kinds of things. And unfortunately, we are not going to have that 5 million car grant that some of our leaders seem to be able to leverage. And so it is vital for you to ask yourself this question. For this upcoming election, what is in this for me? And trust me, fellow Kenyans, it's not the 100, 200, or however much money that the MP gives you, because if you think about the cost of living, this really would do nothing even if you were to take the money. As one of the candidates said, take the money, but vote with your conscience. Think about your future. Think about the plans. Think about how far the vote will go for you. 100 or 200 shillings can buy a packet of unga, but we are giving away our votes for the next 5 years. What is it that we want the government to do for us? Now, again, we as Kenyan citizens, as regular citizens, will not have the opportunity to find ways to not pay taxes, as some of our leaders, especially in parliament and other high places, seem to be able to do. And so it's incumbent upon us to make really good choices with this upcoming election. And so when we think about the upcoming election, there are opportunities for us to make a difference, to think about how we can craft a better republic, a better Kenya, a Kenya that works for not just the wealthy and those who have the money, but all of us. And so today I want to speak to you about why I would choose to run, um, and what it is that this campaign will be hoping to offer. This is going to be a different campaign. It's not about names or coalitions or other people. It is about we, the people of Kenya, we Kenyan citizens, sisi wa Kenya. There are many candidates who are vying for presidency, and I urge you to look at their policies, not their personalities. So first and foremost, this campaign will be about policy, not people. As Kenyans, we need to discuss policy. We need to discuss those things, those policies that the government puts in place and how they affect us and the future generations. So this campaign is not about people, it's about policy. Our current politics really spends a lot of time pointing out why this candidate is a good candidate or not a good candidate, or who should be president and who should not be. But this should be about the Kenyan people. We, the Kenyan people, sisi wananchi. Secondly, this campaign should be about policies for the people. And so the day after the election, after the results are known, Kenyans, we shall still have obligations. I'm not sure if that will be the beginning of the new school term, but if you have school children, you'll still have to pay tuition for the next term. Think about the policies that have been in place for the past about 1 or 2 years with COVID. Every two months, kids go back to school, you have to pay full tuition. Even though your source of income isn't doubling within that period of time. And so these are the policies that we should be discussing about. If you have children, you pay tuition. If you are unwell, you have to pay hospital fees and medication and those kinds of things. You have to pay rent and fare. Essentially, nothing will have changed for we Kenyans on the 10th of August. And so we ought to dedicate ourselves to thinking about the policies that will improve our lives, that will change the circumstances in which we continue to live our lives. Our obligations will remain, but we have an opportunity to choose better government, better conversations, better concrete plans to alleviate these burdens. We need to go back to being the people who say najivunia kuwa Mkenya, not najihurumia kuwa Mkenya or naumia kuwa Mkenya. Number 3, political discourse in Kenya today, about 80% of our discourse is about leaders and coalitions and this and that. That is important, but it is not as important as the 55 million Kenyans for whom the next 5 years depend on the leadership that we choose. And so we are, sisi wa Kenya, we are not going to be getting any positions other than the ones that we have. If we are farmers, we'll still be farming. But we are electing people, and we ought to demand that they have better policies that facilitate making our lives much better. And so this campaign, number 4, is not about people, it's about policy. We shall be talking about policies. We will not talk about people, but at the back of our minds, we know that we're talking about Kenyans, 55 million Kenyans whose lives must improve. We don't care if leaders have done this or that or the other or what. We shall keep that out of our conversations because we think that Kenyans deserve better conversations, better discussions. Kenyans really deserve better leadership. So this campaign will be about policies, not people or parties. Public policies affect the common mwananchi, not the leaders. And again, if you think about something like CBC, it is very rare to find that our leaders' children are going through CBC or this other, or they are going to private school, which is a wonderful thing. But for us, other Kenyans, we have to think about what are the best policies for our kids, and so on. We need to talk about policies. We need to talk about food shortage. We need to talk about hunger. We need to talk about how we can resolve all of these things. And this campaign will be about those policies. What can we put in place so that we can resolve these perennial challenges? How are decisions made on infrastructure? If your mode of transportation is a helicopter, how can you design a good road? What do you know about being stuck in a traffic jam? And so we need to have a conversation about equality, infrastructure, about justice, about the role of women in Kenyan society, all of these things that every day Kenyans have to grapple with. And this is what this campaign promises you. Number 5, we need to talk about policies such as corruption and good governance. We admit that Kenya is a secular state. We profess that we don't have a state religion. However, every other Sunday we have our leaders as policy going to church and appealing to God and praying so that we might end corruption. We do not think that this is the path to ending corruption and to implementing good governance. We concede that it is important to ask God for guidance, even as a secular nation. However, we think that it's the government's job to end corruption as we know it, whether it is petty corruption, grand corruption. It's just one of those befuddling things, like why is there so much corruption and why can't government seem to stop the corruption, to end it? Why do we need to resort to praying to end corruption? Corruption is not the oxygen that we breathe. We can fix these things. And so this campaign is telling us, let's give someone the opportunity to actually fix these issues. Clearly, the people that we have had in power have either been unable to end corruption or have been unable to end corruption. And so, to use an old adage, if you can't take the heat, stay out of the kitchen. Government has many limited, immense powers, including the power to deprive us of life through capital punishment. It has a lot of investigative apparatus. The Kenyan government has about 100,000 police officers. It has this legislature and a judiciary that can work together to end corruption. And so instead of praying, we should have policies that actually lead us to ending this scourge of corruption, so that we actually stop giving God the work that we should do. It is important to pray, lakini kazi zingine tuache kupea Mungu kazi, tufanye sisi wenyewe. We have the capacity, we have the means, we have the structures to do those things. Number 6, this campaign is about government by and for the people. We recognize Kenyans as hardworking, ambitious, entrepreneurial, and very optimistic. We don't look for handouts from the government, although sometimes we do. And so to have a fair playing field with no corruption, working together with the government hand in hand, without these corrupt activities, or without government ministers, for example, ignoring COVID-19 challenges and saying, well, you can't get services. These are the policies that we are talking about. Government ought to facilitate those things that it asks the citizens to do. If you have 8 million COVID tests, 8 million vaccines and 54 million people, you can't then say you're going to not give services to the people, because there's a bit of math that doesn't add up. Kenyans are hardworking and they don't want to be threatened about their kids, So, for example, 60% of Kenyan parents are farmers. Now, if you know anything about farming, you know crops take 4 months to grow. The school term is shortened to 2 months, and then you have government policy threatening to arrest you if you don't pay tuition for your kids, even though now you have to pay double the amount of money that you would have paid otherwise. And so it seems insensitive that we are not considering the plight of parents with COVID going on, with shortened semesters. And so this is what, when we look at government policy, when we listen to what our government officials are saying, it's almost like we're back to the wapende wasipende era, which I think we got rid of many years ago. Kenyans work hard to improve their economic well-being, to educate their kids, and so they also want to be safe and secure from COVID and other vagaries. And so to ensure that government has policies that protect their persons, their property, and policies, we think this is a way towards the creation of a better Kenya. And so this campaign is about policies. And my fellow Kenyans, we need to elect leaders who make and implement the best decisions and create the conditions so that we can work, thrive, and improve our lives. The decisions that leaders will make become public policy. It is this public policy that our campaign is especially interested in. And so we need to move to a different conversation, one that asks, what is the government doing and how does this impact me as a Kenyan citizen? We need to get rid of bad public policy, because bad public policy erodes faith in government, and then we are left asking, what happened to the COVID-19 money? You hear of COVID millionaires. These are not things that are helpful to government, but we know that our campaign can change this, and that we can restore faith in government, and that Kenyans can be proud again, because government is working with them and for them. We need to focus on good public policy. And when we think about the bad examples of public policy, we have seen proposals and promises, and of course, political campaigns will have many proposals. They'll have many policies, or at least promises that then, in theory, should become public policy. Now, political campaigns that win become governments, and their promises are often made into public policy. Most Kenyans will remember in 2013 there was a campaign that promised every standard 1 child would get a tablet. And of course we cheered, because a tablet, every kid, million tablets, great idea. But this was probably one of the worst examples of proposed public policy, the worst example of public policy, because if you think about the 10,000 primary schools, but you also think about 1 million children who take about 12 years to grow up and enter the workforce, and you think about how technology changes quickly, I'm not sure how this was supposed to work, but it sounds great to say, well, let's give every child a tablet. Instead, had we promised and actually given every Form 3 and 4 child or student a tablet, they're only 2 years from entering the workforce, and so they are more likely to actually use these tablets for something good. And so this might have been a campaign to win votes, and it sounded great. But when you really sit and think about, what about charging them electricity, who is trained to use them, we need to have campaigns that make good promises that become good public policy, and this is what we are promising. Specifically, there are some things that we are going to do if we are elected into government. And so even as the next few weeks go by, we shall talk about some of these proposals in the new blueprint for new republic that is based on the rule of law, that is based on good public policy, that is based on a government that works for the people, that is a better governed Kenya. Now, we have some commitments that we want to put out there that we are going to actually follow through. These are not just promises. So, for example, the first promise is that we are going to have a woman as the vice presidential running mate. Women make more than 50% of the Kenyan population, and there's no reason, even as we talk about the two-thirds gender rule, there's no reason why we do not have or have never nominated a woman as a vice presidential running mate. And so this is one of the things that we absolutely will do. Number two, most Kenyans, actually about 75% of Kenyans, are below the age of 35. This comes to about 37 million citizens. So not only are we going to nominate a woman vice presidential running mate, we're also going to nominate one who is under 40, essentially somebody who is a youth. Number three, free primary and secondary education. In this, we are going to implement if we have to probably take away some of the chase cars that our governors have. But it is important, it is imperative that all education will be free of tuition. Day school students will pay no tuition. Secondary school pupils will probably pay tuition for the period, but also with the goal to eliminate any monies paid for education or any facet of education within 5 years. We will also, number four, appoint education cost-cutting measures. So cost-cutting measures in education, including, for example, the question of whether there should be uniforms worn or whether we should have, for example, non-decorated khakis or blue shirts without specifying where to buy them in. Because again, these are some of the places where parents are losing money as we ask for students to wear uniforms and we are not necessarily showing that uniforms improve performance. And so again, we are going to look into how to reduce costs for parents in the education sector. Now, the CBC has come under a lot of criticism, and I think some of this criticism is warranted. Now, the number five item we're going to focus on is an education system and exams review. The burdens of the CBC system must be addressed, and we cannot just say that it's parents refusing to do things. If you live in Turkana and your teacher says, take a picture and print it, I'm not sure if the person who puts in that requirement has ever been to some of these areas, whether they have electricity, computers, printing money. This is a burden on parents, and education should not be punitive, but also more importantly, it's going to disadvantage those kids who do not have the resources as they would in other areas of the country. And so it is important to review the education system, to also implement a system in which people who have dropped out of education can take an exam and can continue with the education later on in life. The current system, besides CBC, the 844 that locks out anyone who doesn't complete Form 4 is inherently unfair, and this is something that we should change. But also we should be cognizant of the fact that the education system as structured now drops about 90% of students between standard 1 and going to university. And 1 million children go to school in standard 1, 500,000 go to secondary school. What happens to the other 500,000? And then about 100,000 pass to go to university and other tertiary institutions. If anyone brought to you a system that they said is 90% guaranteed to fail, I'm not sure that anyone would want anything to do with that. But that's what we have in the examination system in Kenya. And so we have a system that is primed to perfectly fail our students. I'm not sure how we are building the future in resources, human resources, but that is a system that we need to change immediately and figure out whether the education system should be delinked from exams, so that, you know, if you're going to university, there's an examination administered by the university placement agency. Number 6, our priority will be the youth. Following the elections, we shall create a youth ministry that is headed by an actual youth person below the age of 35, with 80% of all the positions in that ministry filled by the youth. Further, we promise that each ministry will have a youth division that coordinates youth affairs with the youth ministry. Today we have the youth affairs ministry that is lumped together with the public service and some other few items. To have youth who constitute about 70% of the country not even having their own selected youth ministry that looks after their issues is a disservice to the youth. And perhaps this is because of who the leaders are. And so when we talk about policy, this is what we're talking about. At the county government level, we shall also encourage, in the national government will propose funding for youth ministries, because we don't believe that 37 million Kenyans, the issues that affect them today and in future should be left to scattered through a bunch of ministries, and so on. Further, number 7, we pledge to have a women's ministry. And so when we think about 50% of the Kenyan population being women, estimated at between 27 and 30 million women and girls, we are not necessarily saying that there's different issues that affect women and girls, but we actually do know there are. We talk about gender equality and those kinds of things, but this is just, we're just paying lip service to 27 million Kenyans, women and girls. And so it seems to me that we ought to be having a ministry dedicated to women affairs, not just women sports and some other thing. And so some of the affairs of this ministry will include legal affairs, IPV and GBV prevention programs, and other things, and so on. And so again, this would be headed by women, but even better, we are pledging that in the next cabinet we shall have equal representation, and we are going to speak about that in a bit. But it is important to promote the human rights of women and girls by all Kenyans on a continuous basis as national policy, as public policy. Number 8, equal representation. Even though past campaigns and subsequent governments have talked about their goal of representation of women by women, or representation of women, we will not only have the first Kenyan female vice president, but we'll have the first Kenyan government that will have a 50-50 cabinet representation by men and women. And again, we also want to make this cabinet part or significantly represented by youth. And so it seems to me that it has been past time for us to actually have equal representation, not just the 2/3 rule, but actually implement this with vice presidents, with 50-50 cabinet representation, but also by representation by youth and especially young women. Now, number 9, we want to think about human resources. Considering that youth are about 70% of Kenya's population, we need to have a national policy about human resources and about what these youth are going to do when they are older, and what kind of jobs they are going to have. Today's Kenyan economy is about 40 to 60% dominated by agriculture. I do not believe that this is what we want for our youth. And so we need to not bury our heads in the sand and hope that something comes through. We need to think about our human resources. We need to ensure that our youth are not driven into despair due to lack of employment and so on. If we cannot employ youth or find employment for them, we need to get them to seek work elsewhere and not just the Arabian Peninsula. And so as a government, we ought to seek and should and will seek agreements for youth to work in different places, including countries that have labor shortages and so on. And so even though we may criticize this as brain drain, we would like to dare anyone to defend an unemployment rate that is about 40% and that mostly affects youth, where we can have youth go out there and make money and build their futures and their families and actually also build Kenya. But also, as we think about the civil service, the future of this civil service is younger. And so attrition or replacement, especially by younger people. But again, when we think about the civil service and the question of whether this is a sustainable employment avenue, it is important to think about how else we can help the youth to be more well taken care of. Number 9, we intend to especially focus on ICT research and development. A country that does not discover or invent things is destined to forever depend on existing items and others' research and creations. And so we will dedicate progressively increasing about 1% of the national budget to ICT, to research and development. At the present time, I believe we are spending about 0.8% of the national budget, but we'll also foster patents, discoveries, product development, innovation hubs, and this will become a priority, not just an afterthought, because the future is in ICT, it's in research and development, and these are things we should be focusing on significantly. Number 10, we want to address the issue of healthcare and access, both the cost of healthcare, medications, and so on, but especially lack of access to private insurance. These are experiential, and I am sure most Kenyans who may have experienced an element of this. We suffer from health discrimination. Older adults from about 65 are mostly unable to get private insurance, but they're also sometimes unable to pay for NHIF. And so even though we have talked about universal healthcare, at least the previous government has talked about universal healthcare, a future government ought and should and will pledge to pay the NHIF premiums for all 1.9 million Kenyans who are over 65 to obtain free health care at government hospitals. This is a very small percentage of our population, and so it's really not too much to ask that we take care of the elderly. But besides this, we shall also require health insurance companies to insure at least 5% of older adults, 5% of their total customer base. So, for example, you have 100,000 people subscribe to your insurance, your health insurance, you have to insure 5% of them being older adults, because we are discriminating against the most vulnerable, the people who are most likely to have increasing healthcare costs and challenges. And we are just saying, well, we are not, because you have these illnesses, we can't cover you. I think this is healthcare discrimination, and we ought to treat all Kenyans equal. And so we cannot be driving our parents and our grandparents into bankruptcy and poor health just because we refuse to cover them. And so these are things that government intends to do. We also intend to focus on number 11, hunger, food, and human security. It is amazing that almost 60 years after independence, and we have blamed the British and other colonial powers for poor government policy and famines and so on, but we've had 60 years to fix this and we haven't. And so we intend to eradicate within 5 years the hunger, the starvation, and the distress that our fellow citizens in the northeastern region of Kenya, ASAL areas, and more than half of the country's counties experience. And we are taking an all of the above approach. Whether we are going to employ youth through the NYS program to start irrigation programs in ASAL areas, but we intend, it is our goal to have a strategic food reserve with enough food to feed at least half of the arid and semi-arid areas, the counties, the 20-something counties in that region, for 6 months for starters. Eventually, we want to have a strategic food reserve that can feed all of Kenya for at least 3 months. And as Kenyans, we should refuse. It ought to be our public policy to refuse to deal with the same issues that our ancestors were dealing with about 10,000 years ago. We can achieve food security. This is one of the greatest failures of governments, successive governments in Kenya. And so while some of our fellow citizens are starving, we are riding around in chase cars, moving people off the roads. This is pure, terrible government policy. We can fix this, and we intend to fix this. We shall focus on alternative agricultural strategies, livestock farming, and including a special fund for environmentally distressed regions in order to provide food resources, water, and other needed services and things. Now, there are things that don't fit neatly under any specific public policy. However, there are things that as Kenyans we do and have been doing that make absolutely no sense. We need to get away from the old school stagnation. We live in an interconnected world where we can learn from other people. My fellow Kenyans, we need to get away from doing things just because we've done them forever before and so on. And so government practices around some basic issues ought to change, should change, will change, and should move over to the private sector. So, for example, there is no reason why government employees are not, or most employees are not paid for the work they do as soon as the month ends. In fact, there are countries where pay is bi-weekly, so every 2 weeks you're paid. Some places it's every week you're paid, and I'm sure we can compute the amount of money that we pay our employees and divide it into 52 weeks or 26 weeks and make sure that people are paid on time. And so one of the things that we would intend to begin with is that government ministries will pay people on a bi-weekly schedule on the 15th and the 30th, twice a month, no later than the last Friday of the month, and we'll encourage other organizations to do the same. Because it's not really like the government makes money over that weekend, but also we intend to end the perennial strikes, the lack of payment, all the strikes that we see. It is possible to actually give Kenyans better working conditions, but these are actually maybe more major issues. But we also ought to recognize that because we are so broke the last part of the month, we end up not actually doing any work. We just up there freezing or borrowing. But we also intend to do things like flex work schedules, and COVID has shown us that it is possible to do work from home and actually be efficient. We don't all need to flock to work at 8 a.m. and then leave for lunch at 12 p.m. and then leave for home at 5 p.m. We can change things, and there are quite a number of things that in the forthcoming series of conversations with Kenyans we shall be highlighting that are intended to improve Kenya. So, my fellow Kenyans, in closing, there are major issues, public policy issues, that are going to be driving this campaign. it is the idea that we need not endlessly talk of our fellow citizens starving or not having health insurance, of insecurity, of corruption, blaming God, the weather, and other things just because we are inefficient at doing the things that government ought to and should be able to do. We can just continue to sit and corruption reigns, tuition costs continue to increase, basic goods are out of reach because the pay is just meager. We are living hand to mouth or mouth to hand. Um, Prices of medicines are increasing. When you go to hospital and you can't pay, you have to either do a harambee or you are literally held there until you can pay. And so all of these are issues that we can fix, that we can change, that we can give a different direction to. Now, you will be hearing, even today, you're hearing much about other presidential candidates' plans, but we have decided to consciously take a different direction. We invite criticism, we invite positive contributions to see how we can make a better republic, how we can make Kenya a better place. But again, this is not just about a campaign promise or a campaign in a possible future presidency. This is a movement that will continue to impress upon government, elected officials, and Kenyans that there is a better Kenya that we can all arrive at. That this is only the beginning of a conversation, the exchange of ideas, the ideas that will help most Kenyan wananchi, not just the so-called wenye nchi. And so the idea is to dialogue, to advance our ideas together, to pressure government, to make government work for citizens as government is and ought to do. This is a campaign about a better Kenya, a Kenya that was for us, a Kenya that we can be proud to hand over to our future children and their children, a Kenya that is environmentally friendly, that is fair, that is just, that is not corrupt, that is progressive, that respects the rights of each and every citizen in a way that moves us forward and enables us to reach each of our goals and dreams. And so with that, my fellow Kenyans, thank you for listening and God bless Kenya. Let's go out there and make a better Kenya. Thank you.